The Young and the Restless spoilers shock. Under the shimmering lights of the Grand Palais in Paris, Audra stood at Kyle's side with a smile that somehow masked both gratitude and calculation. The party, thrown by the enigmatic industrialist Aristotle Dumas in celebration of his latest art patronage, was supposed to be a gesture of thanks for Kyle's unflagging support of Dumas Industries. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations above a throng of fashion magnates and socialites, each eager to claim the glow of Dumas's favor. Audra had accepted Kyle's invitation to accompany him, not simply as a friend, but as a token of partnership, a gesture designed to bind them closer under the glittering facade of Parisian grandeur. Every time he laughed at her jokes or offered her champagne, she remembered that her seat beside him was a prize won through careful charm, not merely the coincidence of his generosity. As the orchestra's final notes faded into murmurs near midnight, Audra's eyes met Kyle's in a gesture both conspiratorial and intimate. In that golden haze, it seemed to her that boundaries blurred, and she vowed quietly that she would not let opportunity slip away. Back home in Genoa City, Claire paced the polished floors of her father's bedside room with heavy heart and heavy steps. Her father, a formidable figure now reduced to fragile breaths and whispered prayers, needed her close companionship more than ever. Though her heart ached with longing for Kyle's presence in Paris, she had pressed her hands to his promise, "I will come back and ask for your hand again," and clung to it like a lifeline. Each sunrise found her curled in a chair, hands clutching her father's frail ones, murmuring reassurances that overcame her own doubts. She pictured Kyle beneath the Eiffel Tower, dreaming of her, conceiving of the perfect moment to kneel before her once more. Her mind crafted that scene over and over, the glint of the ring, the warmth in his eyes, the tear that would glisten on her cheek as she whispered yes. Yet with every slow tick of the clock, a subtle tremor of unease began to worm its way into her peace. She shook it off, attributing her unease to fatigue and fear for her father's health. Her trust in Kyle, unwavering and whole, shielded her from darker thoughts, until faith alone could no longer sustain her. Meanwhile, Kyle navigated corridors of black-tie elegance and hushed confessions. He believed himself invincible to temptation, a man confident in his devotion to Claire. He reminded himself of her steady strength, of all she sacrificed to care for her ailing father. But when Audra leaned close under the soft glow of candlelight, her perfume drifting like a promise, his resolve wavered. She laughed at stories he told, touched his arm with a deliberate elegance, and indulged his every indulgence. In a moment suspended between propriety and desire, he felt the old thrill of reckless youth return, an echo of countless invitations he had never refused. Audra, knowing his nature as well as she knew her own ambitions, pressed her advantage, allowing flirtation to bloom into something more. One stolen kiss followed another until the lines between gratitude and seduction blurred entirely. Beneath the Parisian sky, Kyle succumbed to the impulse he had always believed he could control. In that stolen darkness, he sealed a choice that would echo back to shock both women whose hearts he thought he held safe. The next morning, as the first pale light of dawn crept across the Seine, Kyle awoke alone in a hotel room that suddenly felt empty and heavy. The festivities had given way to hushed apologies and excuses, Audra slipping away to her suite with a triumphant smile, Kyle fumbling with his suit, chastened by guilt yet dizzy with exhilaration. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, his face haggard, eyes ringed with remorse. And for the first time wondered if he had traded one precious moment of love for a fleeting distraction. By the time he boarded his flight back to Genoa City, he felt a knot in his chest that would not untangle. He toggled between imagined judgments from Claire and the smoldering memory of Audra's touch. Whatever joy he had once felt in promising marriage now lay buried beneath waves of regret he had not anticipated. Few days later, Claire stood beneath the solemn glow of hospital corridor lamps, her heart racing with a hope that felt as fragile as her father's breath. The pregnancy test she held in trembling fingers revealed 2 pink lines, an unmistakable sign that new life had begun within her. Tears sprang to her eyes as she imagined what this child would mean, a blessing born of distance and longing, a living promise of the love she and Kyle shared. She pictured the day she would tell him, the smile that would spread across his face, the softness in his voice as he called her mother. In her joy, she pictured her father's delight, that frail hand clasping hers with renewed strength. The pregnancy felt like an answer to prayers, a gift to them both, enough to heal old wounds and erase the ache of separation. Her mind soared with dreams of a family complete, her heart swelling with gratitude for a future that glowed brighter than any fear. But the universe, it seemed, conspired in cruel symmetry. On the same evening, Audra stood before her own bathroom mirror, a different test clenched in her hand. As she watched the second line bloom, her lips curved into a self-satisfied smile. For Audra, the pregnancy was both power and insurance, a secret she would wield to bind Kyle more tightly to her. Every plan she had nurtured for ascendance within Dumas's orbit now gained personal fuel, through a child she alone could claim as hers. Her mind raced with scenarios, the moment she would reveal the news, the shock in Kyle's eyes, the hushed gossip that would swirl around Claire on her lonely return. Audra imagined Claire's fragile trust fracturing, her pity for Claire dissolving into triumph. In her bedroom's quiet reflection, she rehearsed the subtle manipulations that would ensure the revelation burned hardest in Claire's heart. The moment of reckoning arrived in the hushed stillness of a city park at dusk. Kyle, summoned by an urgent text from Claire, arrived to find her waiting beneath an old oak, its branches stark against the fading twilight. Her face glowed with expectation, her arms clasping a small bouquet of daffodils, pale yellow promises of new beginnings. Before he could speak, she reached into her coat and revealed the positive test, her eyes brimming with tears of joy. "We're going to have a baby," she breathed, her voice trembling. His heart lurched with happiness at her news. Until the soft click of heels announced Audra's approach. She emerged from the shadow of the trees, a calm smile on her face, her own hand extended with a second test emblazoned in their world's harsh reality. "Me, too," she said quietly. The bouquet in Claire's hand wilted instantly, as if sensing its own obsolescence. Kyle stood frozen, caught between two futures he had unwittingly created. On one side, Claire's unwavering faith and the promise of a child conceived in true love. On the other, Audra's calculating ambition and the power she now wielded with quiet assurance. Around him, the park's evening chorus grew louder, distant traffic, the rustle of leaves, life moving forward even as he felt trapped in that moment. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but every word lodged like broken glass in his throat. The weight of betrayal pressed upon him, and he realized that no promise, no plan, could shield him from the chaos he had unleashed. He, who had believed himself master of his own heart, found himself undone by forces he had ignored in arrogance. Claire's face hardened first, a mixture of hurt and fury flashing in her eyes as she cradled her baby bump with shaking hands. Audra's expression remained serene, even triumphant, as though she stood atop a calculated summit. And Kyle, his impulse for honesty warring with his fear of causing deeper pain, simply stood, silent, stunned, and utterly unmoored. The three of them formed a tableau tinged with tragedy, love, and ambition, each carrying a secret that would shatter what came before. In that charged stillness, the future hung balanced on the edge of choice, and Kyle realized that no matter which path he chose now, something precious would be lost forever. Claire stepped closer to Kyle beneath the ancient oak's sprawling branches, her face alight with the quiet glow of certainty and newfound hope. In her gentle hand she held the laminated ultrasound print, its grainy outline betraying the fragile new life growing within her. The evening breeze carried the distant hum of the city, but in that secluded corner of the park, time itself seemed to pause as Kyle took the image in trembling fingers. For a moment his world narrowed to the single beating heart flickering on that paper, and he closed his eyes against the rush of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. When he opened them again, he enveloped Claire in a fierce embrace, pressing his cheek against the soft curve of her hair. He whispered promises that felt both ancient and brand new, vows to stand beside her through every sleepless night, to guide their child with unwavering devotion, to grow into the father he had always believed he could be. In that embrace, Claire felt the weight of her father's illness and the ache of lonely nights melt away, replaced by a vision of the family they would soon become, bound not by circumstance but by the irrepressible force of love. Barely 5 minutes later, the serene tableau shattered with a single, frantic cry. Audra burst through the gathering dusk, her heels clicking against the cobblestones like gunshots in the hush. In her outstretched hand she held a slender plastic stick marked with 2 stark lines, her voice cutting through the air as she thrust it toward Kyle. The words tumbled from her lips in a torrent of accusation. He must answer for the child she carried, the proof she brandished like a weapon. Kyle froze, the ultrasound image fluttering to the ground as if recoiling from her intensity. The promises he had just made to Claire tangled with guilt, confusion, and fear. In that split second he felt the bonds of loyalty warp and stretch, as though torn by conflicting currents too powerful to withstand. Nate emerged at Kyle's side, his concern etched across his features, but his presence only underscored the tension. If Kyle truly were the father, what place did that leave for Nate, whose deep bond with Audra had been built on trust and hope? Audra's eyes blazed with a fierce conviction that brooked no denial. She demanded a DNA test, her words sharp and precise, cutting through Kyle's panic. Yet even as she spoke, the reality of biology interceded. Claire's child was still enveloped in the hidden sanctum of her body, too small and delicate for any test until after birth. The cruel irony was not lost on any of them. Here was a child, a promise of tomorrow, and the mechanics of science insisted on delay. The 3 stood in awkward silence, the park's evening chorus resuming around them as if daring their private storm to yield. Kyle's jaw clenched, the weight of his decisions settled upon him like a shroud. He knew he could no longer shelter his innocence behind half-truths. Finally his voice broke free, tight and raw as wire. He recounted the events in Paris, how he had celebrated under Dumas's chandeliers, how laughter and clinking glasses had given way to a reckless intimacy with Audra. He spoke of blurred memory, of wine that dulled his caution until the lines between gratitude and desire dissolved. His confession hovered between them, an admission born of shame rather than bravado. But Audra shook her head, tears flashing in her eyes, the betrayal carving lines deeper than any words could trace. She refused to accept drunken secrecy as excuse, for in her grief and anger she felt the future she had dared imagine slipping irrevocably through her fingers. Claire, stunned by the sudden reversal of fortune, could only watch as the world she had just built began to fall away. The ultrasound image fluttered on the cold ground, its promise of new life tainted by doubt and suspicion. Her face paled, and for a moment she seemed to shrink into herself, the strength she had mustered in her father's bedside room slipping like sand through clenched fists. The oak's ancient limbs bore witness to their unraveling. The hope ignited and extinguished in a heartbeat, the fragile bonds of trust twisted by hidden actions. In that hollow pause, Claire realized that love alone might not be enough to bridge the chasm now yawning between them. Audra, her tears transforming into quiet fury, turned away without another word. Each step she took echoed like a hammer blow against the brittle walls of their relationships. The park, once a sanctuary for confession and joy, now felt like a battleground strewn with the wreckage of broken promises. Nate reached for Audra's hand, his silent presence a balm she neither sought nor accepted. In her retreat, she carried with her not only her pain but a resolve hardened by betrayal. She would claim the truth, no matter how long the wait until DNA could speak its verdict. Kyle remained between the 2 women who had come to define his happiness and his ruin. The weight of his mistakes pressed against his chest, each breath a reminder of the chasm he had carved with impulsive desire. He wanted to chase after Audra, to beg forgiveness, to offer explanations that might soothe her wounded heart. Yet even as those impulses simmered within him, he knew that his first duty was to Claire and the child she carried, a duty now tainted by the specter of doubt. He knelt beside the fallen ultrasound, gingerly retrieving it from the cold ground, as though protecting the fragile life it represented from the harsh reality closing in around them. The city's evening lights flickered on, indifferent to the storm within his soul. By the time Claire withdrew, her shoulders slumped with grief, Kyle could see the tears glistening on her lashes. He followed her in silence, each step a confession of regret that words could no longer express. The promise he had whispered in her arms now felt like ash on his tongue, and he realized that rebuilding trust would demand more than vows or apologies. It would require time, transparency, and a willingness to face every consequence of his actions, no matter how painful. As they moved away from the oak's looming shadow, the delicate image of new life pressed against his palm, Kyle resolved to stand by Claire in truth, even as the unanswered question of paternity and the long wait for certainty stretched before them like an uncharted road into the night.